last few days you may have heard the Take Back the City movement, between the protests on O'Connell Street to the forceful eviction on Frederick Street. However, it is very important to remind ourselves of what the goals and true aims are of this organisation. We spoke to Conor from Take Back Trinity about just that.
So I'm Conor. I'm part of two groups, Take Back Trinity and then Dublin North West Housing Action, Finglas and Ballymon.
Okay, so how did the Summerhill occupation movement come about?
So, like, the housing movement since kind of Apollo has been in sort of, I guess, dormancy. But groups came together a couple of months ago at a housing forum, a grassroots housing forum, and with a view to bringing about some sort of action again around housing. This particular property back in May was illegally evicted, and group Dublin Central Housing Action, who are part of the collective here, were helped the tenants resist that illegal occupation. So when we were looking at targets for potential action, this is on the top of our list, and 7 groups got together and kind of made the call about a month ago, and we decided we'd do something here. So yeah, that was really it.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit about the umbrella organisations and why they are involved?
Yeah, so the umbrella organisations, I mentioned a few of them: Dublin Central Housing Action, Take Back Trinity, Dublin West Housing Action, Dublin Renters Union. There's a few of us. So generally we're kind of regionally focused, but we wanted to come together to kind of unite as a network again and to spur some type of radical shift in housing activism again. As I said, like, the housing action's been quite dormant since Apollo, so we're hoping to kind of use this as spark activity that will be nationwide and not just centred on Dublin.
And what are you looking to ultimately achieve?
Well, so I mentioned that the places here had been empty since May. We'd hope that Dublin City Council used their power of compulsory purchase to take control of these properties, compulsory purchase them and turn them into public housing. So anyone who knows the area, Summerhill, Ballybock, knows that the area has been kind of affected by this slow tide of gentrification and kind of colonisation by landlords, and big landlords at that. So the landlord here, Pat O'Donnell and PJ O'Donnell, they own multiple properties in the area, and the majority of them are vacant. So this sucks the life out of the area. It means that local people have nowhere to live, nowhere affordable to live, and you see the effects. You only have to walk around the area and you see how things have gone. So yeah, that's really what we're looking for: compulsory purchase of this. And then broader than that, we've also made the demand that we're in a housing crisis now. There's 10,000 people homeless, over 10,000, and there's 90,000 on the national lists. But at the same time, the Dublin City Council and private landlords are sitting on all these empty properties. So we demand that those places be put to immediate use. If they're owned by the council, they're turned around immediately. If they're owned privately, like this place, compulsory purchase orders put on them and they're turned into some type of housing that people can access. There's no need for this crisis to go on. It's not a natural phenomenon, it's an artificial one, and it's a failure of a market, a failed market policy on housing. We need to put people first. People need, not greed, people before profit. That's what we'd say.
Okay, and you kind of touched on Apollo House there. Is there a difference between this and that movement? And do you think going forward we're going to see more of these movements?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, I think. On the surface level, I think the motivation is quite similar to Apollo House. People see the very nasty side of the housing crisis. There's almost no one that's not affected in some way. They have relatives or friends or whatever. And it's in varying levels, of course. There's homeless people who are the cutting edge of this crisis, the really sharp face of it. And then there's people that are in kind of precarious living arrangements, people that pay through the nose for rent and can't afford to eat. Like, people are affected to a greater or lesser extent. So yeah, I think the motivation's the same, but inside, like, we're not seeking to be a hostel. We're not seeking to provide services, because we don't see that as our job. We see that as the job of the state. That's something that should be taken care of by the state rather than us. So we're demanding political action here. We're demanding change rather than providing and taking up the state's role ourselves. Obviously, providing that type of service, not many of us are professionals here, so we're not in a position to provide services for people that have very complex needs and stuff. So we think that this is a more sustainable model. It's a more immediate demand, but the motivations are fundamentally the same. We're all sick of this crisis and we want to see an end to it.
So what were the experiences of the people that were living here?
Yeah, so prior to May, there's 5 properties in a row here, and between those 5 properties there are some 120 tenants. The majority of these tenants were Brazilian English language students. They're almost university migrants. So they were crammed into rooms here, 4 or 5 people per room, for rent of €350 to €450 euro per month. So it's absolutely extortionate rent and in absolutely squalid conditions. When we went into this place, we found black mould on the walls, we found kind of crumbling furniture, crumbling faces around the house. The place, absolute kip. It was a tenement-like, in fact. So it was actually the fire brigade that came in here on a routine inspection and condemned 2 of the rooms upstairs. There's an attic room and there's 2 rooms in the basement as well. The attic, there's stairs up to it. It's about 2 foot in width. So in the event of a fire, if there were people up there, they'd be incinerated and you'd have an absolute tragic situation. Same goes for the basement. You have dark, lack of access doors, that kind of thing. No way out from the basement downstairs. So yeah, the landlord at that point is given an option. He was told he was told he could either close those rooms or rectify them. He chose instead to illegally evict all of the tenants here. So the tenants had paid their rent was current, and they were evicted anyway. So rather than deal with the problem, he evicted them. Dublin Central Housing Action, who I mentioned earlier, are locally involved, and they'd done some outreach with the Brazilian community and Brazilian Left Front and other groups. So they knew the people here and helped them resist that eviction for a while. Through that resistance, they managed to get money out of the landlord. And to give you an idea how crooked this guy is, on a bank holiday Monday, the landlord came down in a van, or the landlord's agent came down in a van with €1,500 approximately for each tenant, 120 of them in cash on a bank holiday Monday. So this guy is massively corrupt, massively crooked. He has links to obviously local people with, we'll say, questionable reputations that are quite threatening, and we've been intimidated by those same people since we've been here doing this occupation. So yeah, that's really it, I guess.
And is there no legal ramifications for the landlord and those housing conditions?
That's the thing. There's no one inspecting these housing conditions. There's you only have to walk up the North Circular Road to see 100 properties exactly like this. People crammed in like sardines. There's an expose on prime time last year, and I think the figure that they gave was that 1% of properties in the Dublin area were actually being inspected every year. So there's absolutely no oversight as to what these conditions are like, and because there's obviously cultural problems with people inside, predominantly migrants, that don't want to. They can either have a language barrier, that they can't communicate to services, they don't know what their rights are, and City Council don't do enough to make people aware of their rights in their own language. There's also, we found some people that are just ashamed that they have to live in conditions like that, and I guess that's understandable, but it's also tragic. And really, I guess we'd also call for more strict enforcement of minimum standards on places like this. No one should live in a hovel like this, no one at all, and no one should have to pay money like they did here either for the conditions that they're getting.